Hello, Bible readers. It is Monday, October 26th. We are reading from Judges, the first three chapters, and Luke chapter 19, 11 to 48. Welcome to those who are perhaps joining us as we jump into a new book, Judges. There's a lot to say today, so let's see how much I can get in. You know, as much of Matthew, as Matthew often needs to be read as though he's telling a story in order to explain something about a very particular situation in his own day and time, which you may remember when we were reading in Matthew. Luke's stories were often just actually speaking to Luke's story. Matthew, you might take a story out and say he's speaking directly to this circumstance in his own day. Luke is more likely speaking to just his narrative because his narrative is meant to serve all time, much more than Matthew. Matthew's more focused on his own day. Luke is focused on generations to come. Here's an example, is this first story, the Kingship parable in chapter 19, verses 11 to 27. The usual interpretation of this parable takes it as an allegory to be understood within the framework of early Christian ideas about the end time. How would things end? And so in that idea, the nobleman is Jesus, who goes away to become king. He's opposed by the Jews. He entrusts the church to the disciples, and when he returns, he bestows authority on those who were trustworthy. The difficulty in reading it this way is that Luke would actually be speaking against himself in many ways, because it doesn't go along with the way Luke will write about his narrative in total. The parable is best read as a commentary on his own story, a part of the plot that's going to... This story is giving you a summary, really, of the stories to come in the next few chapters of Luke. As this commentary said, Luke provides his readers with a parable that serves to interpret the larger story. Who is the nobleman? Jesus himself. Fellow citizens are leaders of the people who will decry the proclamation of Jesus as king, accuse him of royal pretensions, and mock him as a king on the cross. Who are the servants? The 12. So it's meant to be a guide to the story that follows. And then in the rest of Luke today, what we're going to see throughout the Jerusalem account, Luke is going to portray the masses as positive toward Jesus. Jesus' death is going to be the responsibility of the leadership, not all the people. And that's just a different angle than maybe we saw in Matthew or Mark. Okay, we're done with Joshua. Judges, this is where I need to place, where are we in the Old Testament? We've heard the covenant that God made with Abraham back in Genesis. We've followed the dramatic keeping of that covenant as God helps Israel through an exodus, through the wilderness. We've read how Moses got Israel to the border of the promised land, how Joshua got them in and started assigning lands. You may remember that toward the end of Joshua, Joshua says, "As for me and my house, we're going to keep on serving the Lord," because Joshua recognizes we're not there yet. We haven't finished what God has started. And so Joshua's like, we're going to keep on serving the Lord, knowing that there's more to do. And primarily what there is to do is conquer all of Canaan, kill all the Canaanites, not just some of them. So far, they've gotten the scraps. The main course is waiting for us. So Judges is going to be a book that focuses on Israel's increasing failure at conquest and relates that failure to Israel's growing unfaithfulness to the covenant. They are related. The more unfaithful they become, the harder time they have at conquest. I need to offer a note on authorship, especially of these first three chapters we're reading today. Initial authors of Judges who are writing the story down, they're mostly interested in the mechanics of God. To them, God is like a machine. We do this, God does that, dispensing blessing or burden depending on our actions. Later editors are going to look at those mechanical stories. I mean, this is still thousands of years ago, before the Bible was ever made. But in the process of Judges becoming the Judges we know, there were people who looked at those mechanical God stories who they don't take away, but they add relational touches. I wanted to read The book of Judges, the expanded two-part introduction, paints a much more relational, intense portrait of God's anger and mercy in response to the growing failure and faithlessness of Israel in the period of Judges. The book of Judges is no longer simply a predictable cycle of temporary military heroes in Israel's history. Under the careful shaping of later editors, Judges introduces the record of Israel's slow and bumpy decline into leaving God behind, a decline that even the judges sent by the Lord could not finally prevent or impede. What's very interesting is as this book shows the decline of Israel's faithfulness to the covenant, we then also have these questions that will linger at the end of this book. Again, one more little paragraph. Now that the conquest of Canaan has been only partial, here's how we're going to feel at the end of Judges. It's still going to be a partial conquest. Now that the era of the judges has ended in failure and tragedy, the question we're going to have at the end of this book is, what new strategy will God adopt in relating to and leading God's people? By the time we reach the end of Judges, Israel's life as a community will be so dramatically flawed that God's going to need to find a whole new way of leading and relating to God's people. And so that's what we're embarking upon, is a book where we know where we've been, we've gotten this far, and Israel is going to fail more and more and more. What will God do in the midst of people's failures? It's part of why we celebrate God as full of grace and mercy and abounding in steadfast love. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.